I have a few questions to start off. I'm going to start with you, Laura. There was, action is a key word here, and I'm wondering what actions you hope that this work would inspire when you started the project, and how does that look now?
So I was brought on to direct this project to explain what was going on in America to European audiences, which is a pretty tall order because you have to explain a lot about our system in order to do that. And we have a very complicated system, and there's a lot of things about our system that are actually very odd and strange, that because they're not happening in other democracies around the world. And so I realized when I was doing that, I was like, am I just doing this for Europeans? And I had to really think about what's useful about it for my country too. And I think it's very important for us to, first of all, remember the history that we come from, because we are susceptible to this mythology ourselves. It's very easy for us as Americans to just tell ourselves the story that we've been told since grade school about how great our democracy is and forget how compromised it's been since day one. And how there's certain elements of it, the kind of weak points that just keep being pressured upon forever. I mean, when I'm thinking today about the SAVE Act, which is the new act that they're trying to pass to make sure that you have to have a birth certificate or a passport to be able to vote. This is a federal law that's being voted on in Congress now. I mean, just think about where that comes from when you're watching the film. Like, everything that's happening right now has a root in the past. And so I think it's important that we have to acknowledge those roots and be aware of them, and be aware of how in so many ways our country is an outlier amongst other democratic nations around the world, that things like the Senate and the Electoral College and lifetime terms for Supreme Court justices, no one else has this. Like, we have this. And we're now going through this form of, you could call it state capture, you could call it a coup, you could call it a constitutional crisis, but we're watching them systematically take apart the civil service. We're watching them get rid of all the referees, as Stephen Levitsky was saying. We're watching them put loyalists in the military. We're watching them destroy the federal government, take away rights wherever it's possible. I could just go on and on. You're all probably following the news, destroying global alliances. And this has a history, and this is a pattern that we can see happen in many other parts of the world that's happening now. And so it was important for me to make the film to just get it in one place as a whole, so that we can think about it as a whole, because we kind of suffer from normalcy bias here, right? We don't take the threats as seriously as we should. We're all victims of American exceptionalism, and we all believe that we can just that somehow we're gonna make it through. And this time I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm not sure about that. I won't couch that language. So I think in many ways I view it now as a real call to action for us to be clear-headed about what's happening and think about what we're all gonna do.
I don't know if I haven't said this, and I want to say it to you now. I just want to say thank you for making this film and for putting it all in place. Okay, Ann, over to you. So it's been a couple of months since you took the action of resigning your position at the Post, and it was over a cartoon that you had submitted that you were told wasn't going to run. And I think since Trump took power, there's been a lot of talk about journalists doing that work of staying vigilant, staying on, reporting the news, just what you were saying, the opposite of what a lot of us just want to check out. How do you contextualize the act that you took in terms of, was it like the last straw of a long series of events, and how are you seeing what your colleagues are going through, your former colleagues are going through in the 2 months since you took that action?
Well, first of all, I did not plan it. mean, I've been an editorial cartoonist for a long time. I've been published since '92. I've worked for the Washington Post since 2008. And like most of my colleagues, I have an editor. You know, you have to deal with certain editing processes. Usually what it's about is the editor is a little uncomfortable with maybe an image you're using, because we use visual metaphors in our work, and sometimes, you know, some of them are a little tough. And they might say, oh, could you do something else? Or if we're not being clear, you know, editors are there for a reason. You know, I have been saved by many an editor. But this time was different. The way that my editing process worked all those years, I've worked under a couple of editors, is I'm not told what subject matter to do. I pick the subject matter, and then I give them a rough, and then it goes through an in-between editor, and then it goes to the editorial page editor. And usually what happens is they'll go, can you maybe do something a little different, or can you change this, or, and you know, I'll try to work with it. This time it came back, no. And the cartoon that was in question, it was a rough at this point, was, you might remember, right after the election, a lot of the tech titans, the billionaires, the Jeff Bezos, my boss, went down to Mar-a-Lago, gave a lot of money, you know, to the inaugurals, made a public showing of how much they were happy that Trump had won. So I gave this rough with all these tech titans on bended knee at the altar of Trump. Yeah, it was okay. It wasn't the most brilliant cartoon I've ever done, but it made the point, which is what an editorial cartoon is supposed to do. And it came back just no. Not change it, not anything, just no. And I was like, what? And I was texting my you know, the in-between editor. I'm like, what do you mean no? And so we went back and forth a little, and I said, you know what? That reasoning is not, no one's gonna believe that reasoning. I said, this is a reason for me to resign. And my lovely in-between editor said, uh-oh. And so anyway, it was right before Christmas. The editorial page editor that hour went on vacation overseas. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna wait. So when he got back, we had a conversation and got nowhere. And I told him, this is it. I can't do this. I can work with you editing, but you know, this is my job. I am supposed to do this kind of stuff. So if some of you are familiar with Substack, I had a Substack, and I wrote out a piece saying why I decided to quit the Washington Post. And I am not being cute when I say this. I had no idea what kind of reaction I was going to get. I wrote that piece for my readership because I would just disappear after all those years. And for my colleagues, frankly, because my colleagues would like, why are you giving up the best job in the United States? Because, you know, this is the paper, this is the newspaper of her block. You know, the great, legendary editorial cartoonist. I mean, I couldn't go any higher than this. I wanted to stay there. Trump had just won. And I was like, I have got to comment on this. I meant everything I said in that documentary. And so I knew I had to quit. And I did. So when that statement went out, it just started an amazing reaction. And I look back at it now and I realize it's really not the cartoon that made people react, it's just everything that led up to it. Because prior to me resigning, the Washington Post, for the first time from I don't know when, did not endorse. And I know the Washington Post readership was mad about that. And there were other papers that did that too, the LA Times. So, you know, I think every editorial cartoonist has to figure out what their line is, and that was mine.
So, as I watch the film again and as I'm listening to you both talk tonight, it just strikes me how important creating alternative images to the, you know, the reactionary destruction is. And, you know, you've done that with the film, and now you're sharing the film. It's making its way through the United States. It just premiered in Santa Barbara a couple of weeks ago. We're honored to have you tonight here at DOCNYC. Could you both talk about where do we go from here with alternative images and getting them on screens and getting this film to people and with your Substack as well. Either one of you can start, but I think that's something I'd like to hear you guys you both talk about.
So we live in a really crazy media landscape, and I spent time when I was making the film studying that, and we really wanted to spend more time on that in the film than we had, and I've done even more research into it since, and it's incredibly asymmetrical, and I think that the progressive media landscape is really broken, and that's shown by how successful their disinformation and misinformation campaigns were in the last election. I read a report recently that conservative online activity outnumbers progressive online activity by 25-1. Like, that's not just double. It's just astronomical, like how outgunned we are in this way. And that's happening at the same time as a media consolidation. So it's very difficult for independent documentary films, especially political independent documentary films, to make their way out into the world. And the combination of that is making it very hard for films like this to be seen. It's also relevant that the film that just won the Academy Award this weekend does not have distribution in the United States. I could go on, and those of you who are doc makers in this room know this story, but for those of you who don't, this is what has been happening for several years. So we'll be releasing the film independently in the United States on a platform. Please stay tuned to where that is. If you know a lot of this stuff, you might have some people in your life that perhaps you would like to share this film with, and we'd encourage you to buy them tickets so that they are able to watch the film in their own way, in their own time. But I think that we have to really think about what we're reading, what we're sharing, how we're sharing it. It's not just the content of what we're receiving and taking in, but the channels through which we are sharing this information at this moment. And I think we have to be really thinking outside the box. And I believe at this moment that would be best if it's correlated with whatever form of action is comfortable to you. Because it's very clear to me, no one is coming to save us. No one. The courts are not going to be able to fight this back either successfully or in time. It's happening too quickly for that to happen. It's very clear that Congress is not going to save us right now. And so I think about what the people said at the end of the film, which is that this is, Jamie Raskin was saying, the magical thing about this country is not that we're not having problems with fascism, authoritarianism, and racism, but that somehow the people were always able to get beyond it. This is our moment to prove that the people want to get beyond it, and that we have to find some way, shape, or form of activism to be able to do that. And each one of you will know what that looks like for yourself, right? That might be joining Indivisible and calling your reps. It might be on the 5 Calls app and calling your reps. It might be protesting. It might be direct services to immigrants who are endangered right now. It might be by volunteering at something in your community where there's a community that's under attack and threatened that needs help. You'll figure out your way. Maybe you're a lawyer and there's some legal aid you can do. But I think it's a moment in this country's history where it's going to require the people in a major way to stand up and fight back against this. And it's up to all of us to figure out what that's going to be. It's a personal decision, a very personal decision, but I think we're at that moment.
So we have just a few minutes left, but I'd like to just see if there's a couple of questions from the audience that, if you have any, love to hear from you. Yeah, right here.
I was interested, I've been following Project 2025 for about a year and a half, so a long time. And now everybody, of course, knows that we're seeing that implemented. But we're also seeing these last couple of weeks, the Elon Musk phenomenon, the awareness that there's a coup within a coup that's been taking place. And I didn't see a lot in your documentary
I wish you could have seen the 4-hour rough cut. I had a lot about Leonard Leo and Citizens United in there, but I was making it for a European audience, and they were like, "You gotta just like." There's a lot in here already, and I was like, but Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, and they're like, that's enough of that, So I think that in some ways we've been experiencing state capture for a really long time. I mean, Sheldon Whitehouse has been successfully yelling this from the rooftops forever. And so that's another thing to look at, is like how much of this has been going on for quite a while. And an understanding now it's getting baked in, and it's being weaponized, and it's being made into law. It's been 2 decades that we've been listening about unitary executive theory and the expansion of executive power, starting with George Bush and the Iraq War. This gets us to where we are now, and so it's like there's sliding, right? And when you're not vigilant and you let things slide, this is where we can end up potentially. So I would love to focus more on money, and I'd love to focus more on the media landscape, because I think that misinformation and disinformation is playing an absolutely crucial role. I do think that there was a bunch of people who made informed decisions when they voted. I think a lot of people did not make informed decisions when they voted. And I don't know if you know about Progress 2028, but that was the misinformation campaign that was paid for by Musk to spread lies about the policy of Trump and Harris, and like getting people to misunderstand like what the policies were on both sides, and it worked.
Well, yeah, we don't know if he stole it yet. We still haven't proven it. But
Yeah, and interestingly, Musk wasn't a thing when we were finishing the film. That happened like right after I finished it. It was actually like starting in like August, September that Musk started playing a role. And here we are today. I mean, that happened very quickly.
So we have to wrap it up, but I just want to leave the last word here with Ann. And if you could, there's a part of my previous question that we didn't get to, which was, being in contact with your former colleagues, or just journalistic colleagues in general. How would you cast their state of mind right now in terms of their sense of morale, or even the fight that Laura was talking about?
Well, I know obviously there are people at the Post that are very upset. I mean, talk about things going fast. I mean, I started working in 2008, as I mentioned. The Post is a shadow of itself now. No one trusts it. And I don't think it's going to come back. I mean, not until things change with the ownership. But it's, the morale is down. I mean, and going back to what Laura said about the news and critical reading of the news, this is a problem. I think that's the big reason we have Trump, is because people are not critically reading the news. I mean, I taught a class it started right before COVID, so before the election, and I was amazed at how many of my students, even though they were very engaged because they were young and they really cared about things, didn't know how to read the news. They were getting their news through social media. I made it a rule that if they were going to talk about a story, they had to bring in 2 sources. And that opened their eyes a little bit. But you know what? It's not just students. It's people my age too. So I think that's a big problem.
Laura, Ann, thank you so much for being here and for sharing this amazing film. Thank you all for coming.